This is the cherished post-lunch slot. So what I'm going to try to do, knowing that lunch is kind of a sedating effect, and because, oh my gosh, can you believe the morning? I learned so much. It was really incredible. So my brain actually feels very full as well as my stomach. But allow me, if you will, for the next 25 to 30 minutes to take us an important step back in the day so far. To step out of this world for a moment and to take a more deliberate look at the world. Now, by this world, I don't mean just the world of dyslexia. I mean any space, any zone, any sector where people think differently. And I live in that kind of space every day, the world of entrepreneurs and creatives. Bruce was nice enough to mention my first book. My first book was focused on entrepreneurship. The second was focused on creativity. And the third, which is coming soon, is focused on leadership. And today, I'm going to try to blend some of those themes. So, when I say that I come from a similar world, I don't mean that creativity and entrepreneurship and that space that I occupy is the same as the world of dyslexia, not by any stretch. However, the overlaps are many, and so too are the challenges and the opportunities and the insights to be shared in general, but particularly as it relates to taking diverse, divergent, neurodiverse thinking and integrating it back into the world. As we take this brief step back, I'd like you to think about a question. Just kind of float it in the back of your heads. And this is the question: where is this leading? So for example, all of these incredible things that we're learning today, the exchanges we're having, the resources where is this leading? And more relevant to you, think about where you were yesterday, or the day before, where you'll be tomorrow. The things that you do right now every day, the way that you think about things, and that integrated with what you're learning today, where is this leading? Or maybe more accurately, where are we leading? Here's the context. We all live in this much larger shared world. And in that shared world, one simple truth, one stubbornly simple truth remains a constant. And that is that almost all of the human development systems on the planet Earth, and just pause and think about that. That means all the systems that underlie and in theory hold together and advance our schools, our places of work, our governments, from preschool through job training, are based on a century-old idea of the average person. And they're wrong. There is no such thing as the average person. And even if systems based on that idea have been able to get away with it over time, I can tell you that those systems are not built for change and adaptability or progress. They're built for cookie cutting. So what I want to help you see today is that, especially in the current environment, in the world today, this is a decidedly bad thing. It's dangerous even. But I also think it's hopeful. Before I get into all that, I'd like to begin by telling you a little story. Now, it's possible that you've heard about this story, at least in part, but just in case you've been sleeping under a rock for the last couple of years, Amazon is dating. You might know that the company is currently located in Seattle, Washington. Well, for a couple of years, they've been spanning the country, looking for a second city or cities in which to locate a second headquarters, what they affectionately call HQ2. And so a little over 2 years ago, they put a call out, and the call basically went like this: make yourself lovable so we can love you. And if that sounds more like a script for an episode of The Bachelor, it's because in ways it hasn't been far off. Consider this. Initially, 238 cities lined up to woo Jeff Bezos. Not 2, not 3, not 8, 230, I can't even list 238 cities in the United States. And that list, in some ways, wouldn't surprise you because it included some of the bigger cities, call them the IT cities, Chicago, New York, Washington, Dallas. But 238, it's not all big cities, it's medium and small. And here's the incredible thing. Regardless of their size, or resources, or experiences working with an organization like Amazon, there's been almost this universal giddiness about the whole thing. And some of that is justified, I guess, because Amazon is promising a lot of great things, not the least of which is 50,000 new jobs. But it's more than that. It's almost as if these 238 cities have been looking around at each other thinking, what if I was chosen? Can you imagine the look on the other cities' faces? I mean, at times it truly has been more reality TV than reality. And just for fun, I want to give you a couple examples you might not have heard of. Tucson, Arizona, my hometown, by the way, of which I'm usually very proud, in their infinite wisdom decided that as part of their bid to bring Amazon to Tucson, they sent Amazon a 21-foot saguaro cactus to make themselves look hot. It didn't work. But smaller cities even went further. Stonecrest, Georgia. Anybody know Stonecrest, Georgia? Nope, me neither. Stonecrest, Georgia offered to de-annex part of its town to create a new town which they proposed to call Amazon, Georgia. And all 238 of the cities who applied to be considered agreed, at least in principle, to massive tax breaks, huge infrastructure changes, and all the other minimums that Amazon said you had to have in order to be considered seriously. So this is the rub in all this. In order to get the goodies that Amazon was promising, the very first thing you had to do was average yourself. You had to meet the standards, huge standards, by the way. They required huge sacrifices and changes. You had to meet the Amazon standards that said, this is how we will look at you. These are the only under these circumstances, and by the way, this is our definition of what's valuable and worthwhile. But a little over a year ago, a bright ray of rationality and sunshine briefly broke through. Little Rock, Arkansas, who initially was part of this train of suitors, changed their minds. They took themselves out of the running even before the first cuts had been made, and they were actually up in the upper 25% according to Amazon. And they did it in the most conventional and unconventional of ways. They wrote Amazon a Dear John letter, or in this case, a Dear Jeff letter. It was a really hilarious move, not just because they did that, because they didn't just send a letter to Bezos. They took out a full-page ad in Jeff Bezos' own paper, the Washington Post. And they did a beautiful riff on the "it's not you, it's me" breakup strategy, including acknowledging that Amazon was pretty tough to break up with. They said, after all, you're smart, you're sexy, and frankly, incredibly rich. So it was funny, and yet it was brilliant, and it was insightful. It was a way to say publicly to Amazon, but also to other companies and other investors who might come their way, and even to themselves, hey, we're here too. Come check us out. Oh, and by the way, we know who we are, and we're willing to bet on that any day, even if it means losing you. And so Little Rock basically realized that to do otherwise, to do other than to bet on themselves, would be a deeply wounding move, even with the likes of Amazon. It would be to throw away what they knew about themselves, what they knew made them unique, efficient, and attractive. And they chose not to do that. So, is this a story with a moral of be yourself? Yeah, of course, to a certain extent it is. But what I want to talk to you about today is something around that. That is a key part. And if you don't know who you are, that's task one. But around that is having a sense of that bigger picture in which you exist, and more the dynamic that's happening at any particular point in time within that larger picture. And most of all, combining all these things, a knowledge of yourself, a knowledge of that bigger picture, an understanding of the dynamic in which it's happening to create something different, something better, something more distinct. Think about this simple truth. You could have all the assets and skills and strengths that are needed and even be willing to bet on them. But if you don't have a sense of the bigger picture and that dynamic happening around you, at best, you're playing from behind. And at worst, well, I don't know, how bad could it be? Want to take a look? Consider this picture. This is just a snapshot of the massive changes that we've all undergone in less than the first 20 years of this new century. And if you look at the orange boxes, for instance, you'll see things that make you familiar with that kind of change every day, technological change. But even within those, I mean, this is really stunning. But it's not just technological change, it's leadership and directional change. It's environmental change, both literal and figurative. It's social change, just to name a few. Pick any one box, and you can see that in less than a 20-year span, the kinds of changes that have taken place in single areas have been enormous. And then there's this. Do you realize that it has been just 10 years since the iPhone was introduced? Does anybody remember what it replaced? Is anybody, I thought I heard somebody say, does anybody remember the Motorola Razr? Okay, because Motorola not only dominated, they dictated this market before the iPhone came in. And the Razr actually was a phone. This isn't a phone. This is a supercomputer, and the phone, my friends, is an app, one of dozens, if not hundreds, on your own device. And think about this, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, that app, that function, that tool was something we couldn't live without. Now, many of us don't even use the phone app. The point is that the world is changing in ways it never has before. They're much more complicated, and the speed is only picking up, it's not slowing down. And leaders across sectors realize this. Sometimes they don't want to, but they're fully realizing it now. In fact, they generally refer to, or at least acknowledge the world by this acronym, VUCA. It's a world that's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Not in a moment, or even in many moments, ongoing and perpetually. It's a world where abnormal is the new normal. Think about that. Abnormal is the new normal. What I'd like to do is give you 3 quick windows into this world, not because I don't think you sense the change going on around you, but to show you the depth and the breadth of this change and its impact, and also hopefully to show you why you should care. So the first window I want us to peer through comes from the World Economic Forum. Now, if you don't know this organization, they are a global organization. They're made up of thousands of members. They come from government, business, and a dozen other sectors. And every year, the World Economic Forum puts out an annual risk report. The idea is to survey at least 1,000 of their members, sometimes it's more, and get a bird's eye view of how people in different sectors and different roles are seeing the world. Its opportunities, but as the report's name implies, its risks too. So for the last 10 years, the report has been saying that risks are on the rise. And that's true, and that there are more of them, and that's true as well. But about a year ago, the people at the forum and behind the report thought that maybe we were missing something. Not just their members, but all of us. And so they drew a distinction. In their introduction, they said this. They said, we've actually become remarkably adept at anticipating and managing conventional risk. But when it comes to complex risk, we're far less competent. So that's what they said. Let's pause for a moment and let me tell you what they meant. Conventional risk is that kind of risk that when it comes, it might surprise you. But pretty quickly, you can get your mind around it. And soon after that, you can get your arms around it, and inevitably, you can establish some kind of status quo or predictability so that you're back in a comfort zone. Complex risk is something different. It's not just the risk occurring in front of you that affects you, or even the risk to the edges that you're aware of. It's risk even beyond that, and all these risks starting to weave over one another and to affect one another so that even the risk in front of you, you can't fully understand or predict exactly what's driving it. What the report was saying is that change itself is changing. It's no longer a variable, it is a constant. Risk is a symptom. That's a global view. What I'd like to do now is take it down to the organizational level and even the individual level and show you that no matter who you are or what kind of heft you have, this VUCA world affects you, and that's why I want to use the example of Walmart. That's their little symbol if you're not familiar with it. A little over a year ago, the Harvard Business Review interviewed Walmart's relatively new CEO, Doug McMillon. It's a very in-depth interview, lots of questions. If you paused and you stepped back from the questions, you could see that there was an assumption that basically went like this. This VUCA world, it doesn't affect you, you're Walmart. You're king of the mountain, and you have all the resources, and you have the bully pulpit in certain cases. And McMillon gradually through the interview is pushing back gently and then eventually more forcefully. And he finally says to the interviewer, just in general, not even related to a specific question, he said, you know, once upon a time, companies like ours made big strategic choices on an annual basis, maybe a quarterly basis. He said, today it's daily. He even said he jokes with other CEOs of major organizations, it's hourly. Think about that. He's not talking about tweaks at the edges. These are big strategic choices affecting over 11,000 stores. They do more business online, by the way. So that's the stores. 2.3 million employees. If you are changing in a major way strategically, this isn't about a tweak. It's about a complete rethink about how you do what you do. And McMillon's not alone. In fact, every year, and you may not be aware of this, large professional service firms like PwC, EY, and others, they do these leadership studies. They survey thousands of leaders across dozens of sectors, sometimes dozens of countries, and typically leaders at all levels, not just a CEO. Every year for a dozen years, these surveys have come out, and sometimes it's more than one a year because it's more than one firm. In those surveys, they ask lots of different questions, but two tend to repeat. What's the environment like that you're operating in right now and for the foreseeable future? And the second question is, given that environment, what's the key skill you need in order to contend with it and compete in it? Here's the remarkable thing. A dozen years, more than a dozen surveys, the answers to those two questions have been overwhelmingly the same. And the answer to the first question, what's the environment like in which you're operating now and as far out as you can see? One word, unpredictable. In fact, a little over a year ago, PwC did a study of nearly 1,400 leaders. Again, dozens of sectors, dozens of countries, all levels of leadership. A full 82% of them said that their future, their economic future, and everything else underneath it that drives that was uncertain at best, and more honestly, unpredictable. This is a stunning admission. But even more important is the fact that this has been the same for a dozen years. This is not going away. So, I only gave you 3 windows into this, but I realize that can be a lot of overwhelming thought and information. Set that aside for a minute. Let's step back and pause. Let me tell you another story. Best-selling author David Foster Wallace gave a talk at Kenyon College, a commencement address, in 2005. The talk has been viewed more than 3 million times on YouTube alone, and I think a lot of it has to do with a story he tells at the beginning that I think is fitting here as well to capture everything I just said. And it goes like this. One day an older fish was swimming along. And coming towards him in the opposite direction, he saw 2 younger fish. And when they passed one another, the older fish said, "Hey boys, how's the water?" And the 2 younger fish stared at him blankly and continued on. But a little further along, one of the younger fish stops and turns to his friend and says, "What the hell is water?" When Foster Wallace tells this story, he says its meaning is actually pretty simple. It's that sometimes the most obvious things, sometimes the most important things are the hardest to see, like that complex risk happening around you. Sometimes they are the most difficult to embrace, like the fact that it's already on your shores, whether you think it is or not. And they are also the things that are most easily ignored. This is our water right now. And the message isn't be fearful. The message is be aware. You know, you might hear all of this, especially the references to the leaders, and say, what's the problem? Even if this is our water, is that the only reason that these leaders seem so stymied and stuck? Is it just the environment? Let me point you back to those leadership surveys again. I said there were two questions that repeated pretty consistently across all of these. What's the environment like? And the second was, okay, given that that environment is unpredictable, what's the key skill that you need in order to contend with it? Again, overwhelmingly the same answer, a dozen years running. You want to guess what it was? Creativity. Creative, divergent, neurodiverse thinking is what these leaders in the thousands across sectors keep saying overwhelmingly they need to contend with the environment they're in that isn't going away. What's the problem? Why have a majority of these leaders in these organizations done nothing to change that? More of those who have, why have their efforts mostly failed? I think there's a strong case to be made that leaders across sectors are stuck in their own thinking. They are stuck in their own dogma about themselves and how they lead, but about all of us as well. I want to provide you with a little proof to back up that observation. 3 insights that I think make the case pretty strongly that they are stuck in their own dogma. And the first is that when leaders say that creativity is what they want, I don't think they really know what they mean. I'm not sure they spend a lot of time thinking about what does it mean not just to be creative, but to think creatively ongoing, not in a problem-solving fashion. I got this problem, fix it, be creative, right? I need a new product line, innovate. Oh, and by the way, don't break any rules while you do that. I don't think they think about it. But if they were to look at their bigger picture and the dynamic going on around them, I think what they mean when they say this is what they need is adaptability. That means they need the ability of their organization, but everybody within it to be able to flex and adjust and pivot as the world keeps shaking them up every single day. Here's the second thing. Whenever they talk about creativity, they talk about it as though it's an act or a skill, as though it's isolated, as though only certain people have it. In order to deal with the world we're all living in now, they need to be talking about it as a mindset, ongoing. More than that, they need to be talking about it culturally, so that not only creativity, but all these other skills related to adaptability are priorities and primary, not secondary or supporting. You might recognize a few of those added skills because especially in recent research, and I just had it added to today by everybody who spoke this morning, there's a very high correlation with these things and with people who are diagnosed with dyslexia. Interesting. But the third insight I want to give you that says that perhaps leaders are too stuck in their own story and thinking and dogma is something more fundamental still. It's leadership. We tend to live a myth when it comes to leadership. We equate the leader with leadership. That's not true. This is the way we think about leadership. We tend to jump right to the position or the level. Who's the leader? Oh, well, where's the C before their title? And then we start to focus on that individual so much that we think of that person as the sole source of direction about where we're going, how we achieve, where the ideas come from, to the point that we believe that a single person or a single way of thinking is somehow going to allow us to progress forward. Especially in this environment, that's not true. That's a false hero story. Leadership is a capacity. And every single human being has this capacity. Don't think about the position or the level. Every one of us can lead in our own way. And it turns out that leadership within teams and organizations is actually more effective when it moves, when it constantly moves across the tribe, regardless of what your title is. It's even more effective when whomever is leading at any one time realizes that their job is to guide and cultivate others, not just to get them to follow, but to be leaders in their own right. That's leadership. And right now, at least the data would make us believe that leaders don't seem to see that. It's incredibly frustrating. And it's even more frustrating when you see statistics like this, that only 3% of people think of dyslexia as a positive. That includes all those skills of adaptability that the world seems to be calling for now. Only 3%. So, don't feel down. I'm actually enormously optimistic about everything I just told you. I'm also concerned about something else. So the thing I'm optimistic about is that in a VUCA world, in a world where things are moving this rapidly and change is so hard to predict, neurodiverse thinking isn't just an option, it isn't just something on the rise, it's an inevitability that that will be the norm. So whether we choose to go that direction or not, the world is kicking us down the road that direction faster and faster. That's the thing I'm encouraged about. The thing I'm concerned about might surprise you. The thing that concerns me is us. And in order to help you understand that, let me pause and tell you another story. This is one of the most creative souls that I have ever had the pleasure of getting to know. This is Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, and she's a Harvard sociologist. Sarah thinks about the world differently, and thank God she does. In sociology, Sarah is known for her idea of portraiture. Sociologists try to figure out people, why they do what they do, why they fit or don't fit into a particular group, community, society, whatever it might be. Sarah was one of the first to say, you can't even get a sense of that unless you understand their bigger picture, their beliefs, their experiences, their community. But more, she said, you still couldn't understand that unless you invite them into the conversation. Because if they don't tell you about that world, if they don't tell you about the dynamic through their own eyes, their own thoughts, and their own way, there's no way that you can understand that. When she came up with this, I mean, this might sound second nature to us, but it wasn't. When she came up with this, it wasn't just a great idea. It challenged decades of practice and belief and leadership in her sector. Think about that. Not too far from Chuck Schwab, and you'll hear from David later, and even the others, even the scientists you've heard from, and the boundaries that they've crossed. Just think about that for a moment. When Sarah and I had our conversations, we came to realize that we share a similar observation and a similar belief about how you get neurodiverse thinking out into the world, but also how you impact it and integrate it. I refer to this as taking a deliberate pause, and you heard a reference, this was the title of my first book. A deliberate pause is actually a very simple thing, but it's powerful. It's that conscious moment when you pause, actually, as Bruce said earlier, and say, why are things the way they are, and how might they be better, even if things are pretty darn good? And in that moment, especially if you're in the habit of that moment, you can't help but see and think and act in a different way. Sarah calls that allowing for intermissions. And I like that too. And what she says, and this is the key, is that in those intermissions, you can't just come up with new ideas or reaffirm your fight and its rightness. Instead, you've got to reconsider your own dogma, that invisible force that wants to hold you and your creative ideas back. I acknowledged earlier that I don't live in the world of dyslexia every single day. But in my parallel world, I think I can relate on more than just a couple of things. Because in that world of entrepreneurs and creatives, I can tell you that even among the most brilliant of them, they do not regularly pause. They are not in the habit of taking intermissions. And they don't check in with their own dogma. And sometimes it's their biggest undoing. And if you think about it, it's a very human thing. When we're passionate about something, when we believe deeply in something, especially if we feel it's being challenged or people don't get it, we tend to fight more for our strengths and not enough with them. When I was in venture capital, and I've played that role too, I used to see this pattern across entrepreneurs, particularly entrepreneurs that didn't think we understood them and didn't think we were going to back them. It was a similar reaction that involved a series of statements like this. You don't know how important this is. You don't know how valuable it is, and you don't know how hard it is to do. I'm unique, look at this. All of those statements may have been true, but they were irrelevant because they were made without any understanding, any context for the bigger picture happening around them and for the dynamic happening around them. They were fighting for their strengths, not with them. And they were sitting in a room with people, myself included, who couldn't possibly understand in a first pass and a slide deck of 15 slides why they thought the way they did. They were waiting for us. There was a very deliberate reason that I asked you to think about the question, where is this leading, or where are we leading? You've already heard from these incredible people this morning, and you're going to hear from more this afternoon. And whether they're entrepreneurs or scientists or artists or whatever they might be, it would be very easy to think of these as only success stories. These are stories of leadership. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't ask for what the guardrails were for what they did. So there are two things I'm not suggesting. I'm not suggesting that, one, everybody in this room is going to go out and build Schwab Financial Services. That doesn't mean you can't lead. And number two, I'm not suggesting that you ignore those systems I referenced that want to hold you back. But what I do suggest is this, that we are more than a collection of strengths. We actually represent the kind of thinking and leadership that the world is demanding more and more every day. And I'm suggesting, too, that there's another side to this story in this picture, and that you should think about that. To close, I want to tell you a way you might be able to do that. It's a very powerful concept, and it's actually, I think, one of the most powerful tools of creativity. And it's called the adjacent possible. One of the other people I had the pleasure of I interviewed Sarah, that's how I got to know her, for my second book, The Language of Man, Learning to Speak Creativity. I also interviewed a gentleman by the name of Stu Kaufman, and this is Stu's idea. And the idea of the adjacent possible is actually pretty simple. It's that every single day, we live in a world where we have these invisible boundaries around us that sometimes we don't even recognize. And so we play within those boundaries, feeling sometimes like we're limited by them. We also think about what's possible, often, as though it's a moon leap away. What Stu says is that just by stepping outside your borders, as I think of it, coming to the edge, you can't help but, even if you just put your toe over the line, you can't help but see differently. Are you going to have some massive breakthrough idea? No, the evidence is there that you won't. Because frankly, big breakthrough ideas are an accumulation. Always. I don't care what the story is told in the rearview mirror. They are always an accumulation, and they're never solo. They involve many people and many edits. So Stu's idea is that when you step outside, you're going to see something different because it's different than the world you live within every day. When you step back in, you can't help but see differently within your own world. But the power of the adjacent possible is that if you're in the habit of doing that, just testing the waters, at whatever level makes sense to you as a leader, then ultimately the adjacent possible becomes bigger than what was in your borders or just outside it. You create a greater adjacent possible. It's a pretty simple move, but it's a pretty powerful one. And what I want to leave you with is that there's another side to this picture. Don't just fight for your strengths. Fight with your strengths, and please step up to the leadership that even all these leaders out there leading today say we desperately need. Just food for thought. Thank you.